So another Patreon Q&A. Thank you again, Patreons, so much for your support. I want to thank also PathSet for donating. Once again, is commercial collections for the monthly giveaways, monthly challenges on our Discord channel. If you are a Patreon, come join us on Discord for challenges, giveaways, and a lovely community. If you are not a Patreon, come join our community on Patreon. Lots of extra content. Again, a lovely community, challenges, giveaways, and all sorts of different fun things. And let's start with the Q&A. So the first question is coming from Matthew. Hi, Matthew. Thank you so much for all you do. Thank you so much for your support. I wondered if you would be willing to talk about the composition and or sound design and or production process for your earlier works. The Visions especially has quickly become one of my favorite albums ever, and False Beliefs is my favorite track from the album. I recently found a video of the patch running in VCV and was blown away by how small it appears to be given how huge it sounds. Thank you. Can this really be all there is to the patch? I'm just amazed that you are generating so much sequence variation from so few modules. Any insight you could provide into your process here would be greatly appreciated. So first of all, thank you, Matthew. I have to say, The Visions is also my favorite album. It's the album I'm proud of the most. And yes, this patch is all there is to it. The process was I had a small laptop, an old laptop with Windows 97 still. It was still with VCV beta 0 point something, I guess. So it was an old laptop. I couldn't build bigger patches. I mean, they were crackling, and my computer just couldn't handle so many modules. So this was the whole patch. And back then I had a Nectar 88 keys MIDI controller, and it had also faders and knobs. So I used them to perform the patch. And actually I have here the patch. I found the patch for False Beliefs. This is the patch. It still works in VCV2. What's missing here, the modules that are missing are the blank modules that are not available from the Modular Fungi collection. But this is it. This is all there is to it. What was not seen in the video is the audio module, the master output, and the MIDI C to CV that, again, I used knobs and faders to control the patch. But this is more or less it. As you see, there is no mild meld mixer. There was no mild meld mixer back then. No Chronoblob 2. Yes, so small patches. All of this album was, you can see all of the patches from the album also in the videos. Small patches, mostly performed live. Not mostly, but yeah, performed live. One take, no overdubs, no anything. This is the album, and I will let you listen to this also. You will see it's exactly the same sounds. And the main idea of the Visions was all about using stages, using the segment generator for mutable instruments as a sequencer. So this was the idea behind the album, using it as a sequencer. I like the idea that it had only a few steps, so like 6 steps. Usually I had 5 or 4. So I wanted to explore using stages basically as a sequencer, and all of the variation is coming also from stages. I will show you this in a second, how I used stages. But for example, this is one voice. Oh, I have to change this, just a second. It's even not changed. Okay, so I set it up. And by the way, I'm still recovering from a cold, so I'm coughing a lot. So there will be many cuts in this video, but I hope it's not too bad. So anyway, right? This is the sound. You hear the sequence. I'm not doing anything now with MIDI controllers or anything. Another voice. Right, this is basically the sound. Right, and the bass. This is it. Well, there are 3-4 voices here. it's all about the performance. Right, performing this with the MIDI controller, but again, it was a very old laptop. I couldn't run more modules even if I wanted. So this whole album is very minimal. It's all about the performance and all about stages used as a sequencer. Let me show you now how I use this as a sequencer, and also another technique that I used a lot in this album. Right, so here I have stages. Basically, you send a trigger to the first step of the sequence. You have it set to the yellow mode, right? And then you see it runs, and you can take the pitch information from the first output, right? And then basically you get a sequence, right? But now it will be repetitive. Again, usually I used like 5 steps or 4 steps or 3 steps. It will be repetitive, but you can add variation, and I did this with sample and hold, adding random variation to the different steps, because each step has a CV input, right? So what I did, I used the clock division, for example, right, to clock a sample and hold, and then this sample and hold went and modulated or changed one note. Right? And like this you can get variation. You can have another one actually. Let's see. I used a lot of FM operators, of course. Right? But this is basically the idea of the sequence. The variation of the sequences came basically from stages and its CV inputs. Right. Now another technique that I used a lot in this album, in the different patches, is using sample and hold to generate pitch information, to generate the bass, basically. So what I did, I used the same pitch information, so it's somewhat related, right? I took the level down because I wanted to stay in a range of a bass, right? Triggered the sample and hold. Right? Yeah, and that's it more or less. The two techniques that I used, again, lots of FM operator. I used the delay from MSM a lot. Yeah, plateau, of course, as a reverb. I think the palm loop oscillator was also usually the bass there because of the sub oscillator output. And again, back then there were not so many modules like today. There was less choice. Still many modules, but not as so many as today. And that's it. And that was more or less it. The next one is coming from Thomas. Hi. This might be a bit out of the VCV, but do you think that VCV will be also presented at Superbooth this year? Are you going to be there too? I don't think it will be presented. 2 years ago, I think there were a few community members that live here in, some in Germany, some in Holland, some in Belgium. They wanted to present VCV, but then everything got cancelled because of you know what. So there was no Superbooth in this year. I don't think it will be anything official if there will be something. I'm not so sure. I didn't hear anything, but I don't think there will be any booth or something from VCV. If I'm going to be there, I'm doing my best to try and be there. I want to meet so many people. So many people are coming, so many friends, and I really want to meet them. And I'm doing my best to try and make it happen. We will see. Maybe I will be there. Yeah, there's a chance. The next one is coming from Peter. Hi, Peter. Is there an easy way to set switches for hold, start, stop, sequencers, whole voices, functions like on a switchboard? So there are a few ways you can approach this. Here, for example, I have the manual gate from Count Modula. It has the on output, right? So one click, you have an on signal, a gate or a signal will just go up and will stay up as long as you don't click it again. When you click it again, it will go down. So you have a hold switch. If you want to do this externally with a MIDI keyboard, you can use something like the triggers Mark 1 from AS. Right, it has an external input, and again, you have the latch button. One trigger, one press will keep it high, another press will keep it low. Acts exactly like a switch. Right now, if you want to do this with a sequencer, for example, a sequencer like the SEC3, it has the run trigger input. You don't even need this latch signal. You just need a trigger. One trigger will make it stop. Another trigger will make it run. But if you're using a sequencer that doesn't have a run or start-stop input, you can send your clock through a VCA and then basically gate the VCA. So here again, I'm using the on output from the Count Modula manual gate. Again, you can do this also with the module from AS, the triggers Mark 1, right? If you want to do this externally. But again, one click will open the VCA, the clock will go through and the sequencer will run. Another click, right, the sequencer will stop because the clock doesn't go through the VCA anymore. If you want to do this for audio, for example, there are a few new modules from Sequocell or something like this that are basically latch or switches, but with a built-in envelope. So you can also fade things in and out, for example. Right. And it also has a trigger buffer, so you can also sync this with a clock, right? So that you can press a button on your MIDI controller, it will wait for the clock, and then it will do the action, right? So here I have the clock going to the clock input, a trigger going to the arm input, so it will arm the module, and I have a sine wave. When I click it, it will wait for the clock and it will output the sine wave. I click it again, it will wait for the clock, right? If the clock is slower, let's say, I click it, you see I didn't do anything, let's do this again. I click it, right? It will wait for the clock and then it will basically turn this off. And again, you have a built-in envelope, attack, sustain, and release. If you want to change the settings, if you want it to fade in or fade out, and so on and so forth. The next one is coming from Alice. Hi, Alice. As of the last few months, I found my motivation for modular synthesis slipping drastically. What are some of the best ways to get back into it after a long down time? Okay, yeah, that happens. I mean, it depends. Not really, but it depends a bit if you are speaking about hardware or if you are speaking about VCV. In both cases, I think, first of all, try limit your setup. Try minimize your setup. It happened to me when I started out with hardware. I started small. I had a 7U case. Then slowly things grew. All of a sudden, I found myself with a 13U case. That's 4 rows and another small 1U row. And it was just too much for me. I just couldn't concentrate. It was visually overwhelming. I looked at the case. I didn't know where to start. And yes, and my motivation went down and I decided to sell the case and to go back to 7U. And since then, things are much better when I have a smaller setup. I still have all of the modules, but I just don't use them all at once. I have a 7U case and I always change the modules and I concentrate on this case for a while and then I change things. But still having a smaller setup really helped. The same with VCV. If you are in VCV rack, I recommend delete everything, remove all of the modules and select, for example, 5 collections, and that's it. Don't overwhelm yourself with choices. So for example, choose Instruo, Befaco, Volt, a Valley for Plateau, of course, and the other lovely voices. For example, or choose like 5 or 6 collections and concentrate on them. Don't overwhelm yourself with choices. So again, minimize your setup. I think this will help. Another thing, and this is counterintuitive, but if you are okay with your setup, if the size of your setup is already small or it doesn't bother you, try and get something new. If it's VCV rack, look for a new module that came out or something that you never tried and concentrate on it. Again, concentration is best. Less is more. Right, concentrate on it. If it's hardware, try to get a new module or a new synthesizer, maybe something that is not completely modular, a new semi-modular synth, and just explore it a bit and get back into sound design, get back into synthesis. Another thing is, again, concentrating on certain techniques or certain aspects. I really like manuals. I find manuals really inspiring. So sit down, choose a manual if it's hardware, if it's VCV rack. Choose a manual of a module, or if it's VCV rack, a whole collection, and try and explore it. Try and think about ideas that come up. If there are patching ideas there, try and explore them and expand on them. Right, so try and concentrate on a certain technique or a certain aspect of modular synthesis and concentrate on it, and maybe you will find it inspiring. Another thing, and this is maybe the most important, is to understand that it's okay. It's not a mistake. It's not something you have to fix. Losing motivation in what you do is okay. Losing motivation in modular, in synthesis, in making music, it's okay. It happens. It happens to me as well. Sometimes it takes days until it goes by. Sometimes months. Right, and it's okay. Sometimes you don't have to fix it. Sometimes it doesn't have anything to do also with music or synthesis. Sometimes something happened in your personal life, and it's just affecting it, and it's okay. I think time will eventually fix everything. So maybe it's just best to give it time. But again, minimize your setup. If that's not a problem, try and get something new and concentrate on certain techniques and aspects of synthesis or sound design. And also accept it, that it's okay, that it happens. And that's how it is, basically. The next question is from Chris. Are there randomness modules that can generate a deterministic sequence CVs or on-off triggers each time they are restarted? Ideally, I'd like to be able to pass the random number generator a seed, maybe as a CV, and reset the module, having it replay the same sequence if passed the same CV. So yes, there are a few options, but I think one module you can really experiment with, and everything that has to do with randomness and deterministic randomness and whatever, go to Orange Line. This is the collection for you. So there is Deja Vu from Orange Line, which is a sequencer. I have here, right, I'm clocking it. Basically, it will output random gates, random CV. Right, but again, it's working with a seed, right, that you can choose. And if you reset the module, it will start from the beginning, right? So if I have here, for example, a clock divided by 4, right, you get the same sequence over and over again. Right, if I divide this, for example, let's use divided by 8. Right? And like this, you can also change the seed and get always different results, right? That will still be repetitive. Right? No, you know what? I will not reset it again with an external clock, because I want to show you there is also an internal clock that you can use, or internal sequence. You can use an internal sequence to reset everything, right? So if you turn this here on the repetition, you can have a length of, let's say, 10, and then, right, maybe do something like this, and now each time it reaches the points, it will reset. And will change the seed. Right, but you can also change the seed externally, of course. So here I have a sequencer coming from the ADDR if you want even more repetitive results. Right, so again, you get a seed, you get to reset, so you get repetitive results. You have even a built-in reset trigger that you can use. Yes, I guess this is something you can experiment with and hopefully also enjoy. The next question is from BRGM. I know that switches are the answer, but I'm not getting the results I want. I am looking to generate a musical phrase, sequence or random, and then repeat that phrase with a different voice. Think of a melodic line moving through instruments in an orchestra, please help. Okay, so what you are talking about is basically Hocketing. And I made a video all about Hocketing a while ago. I will put, of course, a link in the description. And yes, you are right. You can do this with switches, sequential switches, basically switching the destination. Right, so you have your sequence and then you switch between the different voices, the destination where this sequence will go to. So here I have a sequence coming from the gateSeq. Right, it will sound like this basically. Right, but I want to switch it between this voice and the FM operator. So I will use a switch, a 1 to 4 in this case, although I just need 2 steps because we have 2 voices. Right, I'm going to send the pitch to one switch and the gate to the second switch. Right, and I will use the end of cycle in this case of the sequencer to be the clock, but you can use any other clock source. It can be a clock division, this can be a random trigger or gate source, this can be a dedicated gate sequencer or clock trigger sequencer, right? But I'm going to send this to the to clock the switches, reset everything so everything will work nicely, right? And now I have 1 volt per octave, 1 step, and 1 gate to the FM operator. Right? And the second one to the surge voice here. Right, so it's the same sequence, but I'm switching it to 2 different voices. Of course, you can use more voices. There are switches with more outputs as well, 8 outputs, 16 outputs. You can do this randomly. Right, but basically, yes, with switches, this is the technique. Again, I will put a link to the Hocketing video I did a while ago. Maybe you will find more inspiration there. But that's it. Basically, use sequence switches. The next one is from Kyle. Hi, Kyle. This probably has an easy solution, but I've run into this problem so many times, I figured I'll just ask here. So whenever I use the gate sequencer 64 from Impromptu for pretty much anything other than drums, such as running another sequencer for some odd rhythms, I run into a problem where it doesn't output a pulse on the first beat and it throws my patch out of sync until I reset it a couple of times. How do I get the gate sequencer 64 to send out a pulse when I start my patch, such as with the run button on the clock or something? And then Johannes said, hi Kyle, this plugin might solve your problem, and he's speaking about the sequencer adapter from RCM. So let's first of all have a look at the issue. Okay, I have here the gate sequencer 64, it's not running for now. And it will trigger a voice, and it will trigger also a sequencer, the ADDR sequencer. Now I have here, why is it so far away? I'm not so sure. Now I have here the first trigger on, which means that the first trigger will move the ADDR sequencer 1 step down, right? And this step has an octave up, just so we can listen to the change. So what will happen when I run the gate sequencer, we should hear the FM operator playing 1 note an octave up and then the rest of the sequence. So let's see if this happens. I will reset everything from the clock. And now I will run the gate sequencer 64 and we will see if this really happens. Now it happened, right? We got an octave up. Let's try this again. Now it didn't happen. Let's try this again. Now it happened. Let's try this one more time. Again, I want one more time when it doesn't work. Just like now. Right, so sometimes it works, sometimes not. And that's because I'm manually triggering the run function, and because how the clock goes into the gate sequencer, it's not aligned with the clock. So sometimes the gate sequencer will skip the first step, basically. Now, there are a few things you can do. The sequencer adapter for RCM, I'm not so sure it will work, because it has to do something with the clock and not with the run. So the issue here again is that the run, when I click the run, it's not in sync with the clock, so sometimes it will skip the first step. So the sequencer adapter might help for other things, like staying in sync with other sequencers, but I'm not so sure it will help in this scenario. What you can try is a few things. First of all, you can use something like a trigger buffer to make sure that when you click run, it will happen with the clock, right? So what you do, you send a copy of the clock to the input of the trigger buffer. The output will go, in this case, to the run CV input, trigger input of the gate sequencer, right? So now when I click this button, or when I use an external trigger, you can also do this with the MIDI controller, for example, the run function will start only together with the clock. It will wait for the next clock signal, and then it will start running. So again, let's reset everything and see if it works. Now I will, instead of hitting this button here, I will hit this button, so it will start running on the trigger buffer. Let's see. Yes, this was one. Let's try this another time. Let's try this another time. And one more. Right, so now every time you hit run from the trigger buffer, it will be in sync with the clock. It will run the gate sequencer only with the next clock signal. So it will not skip the first, step. Another thing you can do, and this might be best if you want to start the whole patch anyway with the run, is, let's let this run, is using clocked basically to start and stop your whole sequences, right? So I have the reset already connected. If I connect also the run and I stop clocked and I stop the main clock, this will also make sure that everything will happen at the same time. There is an option though, here in the right-click menu of clocked, right, to send the reset on start or on stop. I always have this on, right? So now when I hit run, it will reset the gate sequencer. When I hit run again, it will again reset it, so everything will stay in sync, right? So let's try this again now a few times. And now again, instead of hitting run from the sequencer, I hit run from clocked. This worked. Let's try this one more time. And again. And again. And it will work each and every time, because again, now the run will go together with the clock signal. So this is another thing you can do if you want to start when you open your patch, right? When you click open patch and then you open it, if you want directly to have everything in sync, you can use something like the startup delay module from Count Modula. This will basically wait, in this case, 1 second after you start the patch. You can change this to as many seconds as you like, up to 30 seconds, and it will output a trigger or a gate. If you send this trigger to the reset and run of clocked, everything, when you open the patch, it will wait this 1 second or whatever you have it set to, and it will reset and run clocked, so everything will be in sync if you have the reset and run connected. So this is basically what you can do, but again, the issue, it's important that you understand the issue so you know how to approach this. The issue is that when you hit run on the gate sequencer, for example, when you hit it, it will not fall exactly together with the clock, which means that the sequencer will just not start at the same time, and it will skip the first step. So anyway, I hope this was helpful. The next question is from Caleb Charles, I guess. Is there a way to record the CV knob performance, hold it, and trigger that stored performance? I'm thinking of maybe an envelope that can be drawn over a period and then replayed. So yes, there are a few options. I think the best one is using light remove from Sturmelder. Now it's in the library. Basically, you can map parameters, record their movement, this is quite cool, and then play it back in all sorts of different ways. So here I have basically a saw wave going to a filter, and I want to record this movement, right? So I map the frequency parameter, I hit record, and now when I start moving the knob, it will start recording the modulation. I let go, I hit run, and I have this movement. Right, now in the right-click menu, you can change how this will record. You can change also how this will play. So if you have one shot, for example, you hit reset. Right, you can do this also externally. Right, so this is one thing you can try. Right, basically you map the parameter with a light remove or remove light. Another thing you can do is use something like Simpliciter to record also CV. Simpliciter can also record modulation, right? So if I have this, I have just basically offset going into Simpliciter, right? Going into Simpliciter and from there to the filter. Now if I hit record, I can record this movement, right? I can have it loop also. Or I can have it one shot. Now the thing with Simpliciter, I can also change all sorts of things. It can play in reverse, it can play slower or quicker. And I can also save this. I can also, where is it? Save wave file. I can save this as a wave file and then have a whole collection of all sorts of different modulation sources. So again, you have from Sturmelder the remove light, and you can use something like Simpliciter. The next question is from Marcus. Hi. Some modules just confuse me and I avoid them. Take, for instance, several count Modula modules seem a little mysterious, like binary sequencer, binary comparator, gated comparator, and even the new CV stack. Any chance you could illuminate those 4 modules? So yes, we will have a look at them in a second. I just want to say that Count Modula, for example, has an amazing manual for all of the modules. You can download the PDF with manuals for all of the modules. So if you think something is confusing, go to the manual and see, maybe you can find some help there. But basically, yeah, let's have a look at the 4 modules. This will be, of course, quickly, right? I'm not going to go too much in depth, but let's have a look. So first of all, let's start with the binary sequencer. So what we have here, we have a clock, an internal clock. You can use also an external clock, and we have a series of clock dividers. We have divided by 2, divided by 4, divided by 8, divided by 16, 32, and 64. Now a binary sequencer, a binary signal basically is a digital signal that is either on or off, just like a gate. A gate is a binary signal. A clock is a binary signal. It's either on or off, right? There is nothing in between. Unlike an analog signal that has everything in between, a digital signal will have either ones or zeros, on or off, high or low. Right, so in this case, the binary sequencer will combine binary signals, clock divisions, and will create a sequence out of them. Right, so if, for example, now I start adding the divided by 2, let's unmute this. Right, we have the clock and we have a gate going up and down, which is divided by 2. Right, we have a binary signal. See, it goes up and down, and it's a clock division of 2. If I use the 4, it's a division of 4. If I use the 8, it's a division of 8. right? Now the thing is that I can combine them in different levels, right? There is this technique where you can combine gates with different levels and create a pitch sequencer. This is exactly what it will do. You combine a divided by 2, a bit. You add a bit of divided by 4, a bit of divided by 8, and you create a sequence. Right, so again, you combine binary signals, you combine gates, basically clock divisions in this case, and you create a sequence out of them. Now you have other options here. You have a scale. In this case, I have it to 2 volts, so there are 2 octaves on it all. You can change the shape. You can add also portamento or lag, right, if you want to use this for modulation. But this is basically what the binary sequencer will do. Here I have the binary comparator. And again, also here we are dealing with binary signals, with signals that are either on or off, ones and zeros. A comparator will compare 2 signals. When one is higher than the other, it will output a gate from one output. When one is lower than the other, it will output a gate from a different output. When they are equal, it will output a gate from a different output, and so on and so forth. In this case, instead of dealing with sine waves, triangle waves, other waves, we are dealing with square waves, basically, with binary signals. So it's basically a sort of a Boolean logic module, I guess, if you will. Right, so here I have from a sequencer, right, coming just gates, right? In this case, I have 1 and B, right? So A and B, sorry. Right, in this case, when A is smaller or equal to B, we get a gate, right? If I activate the gate for B, right, we get here different outputs and different, basically, logic combinations. Right, I can also compare 2 other sequencers to one another, right, and it will combine all of them in all sorts of different ways. Right, and like this, you basically have gates, incoming gates, and you get rhythms out of them from the different logic operations in this case. Here we have the gated comparator, which is again a comparator, in this case for analog signals. And by analog, I mean continuous signals like the sine wave here. And it has also a built-in shift register, and you can also chain a few. So let's see what's going on. Here I have a sine wave, right? And I can compare this sine wave to a threshold, right? If I send this sine wave to the input, right now it will compare it to the threshold, and from the output I will get a gate, in this case whenever the sine wave goes above 0 volts. You see here the sine wave is above 0, and we get a gate. Right? If I change the threshold, for example, to 4.5, only when the sine wave is above 4.5, the gate will open. Right, so here we get basically a normal comparator. Now the thing here, if I connect a clock signal to the gated comparator, this will come from another LFO. We get a shift register. This gate that's coming out of the output will basically be shifted down the outputs here. And again, we can use this for creating different rhythms, for triggering different events in our patch. And we also get a CV source that will be also the combination of the gates, just like we saw with the binary sequencer. Also here it will work more or less the same, and you can see this here on the scope. It will basically combine, right, the different shift register outputs here, and will create a sequence out of it. Now you can also chain a few modules together. If you take the last output and connect it to the loop input of the second of the next module, you can combine them if you enable the loop, and so on and so forth. So again, you have basically a normal comparator that you can use to generate gates from a continuous signal. And you have also a shift register where you can use it for creating different rhythms and different modulation or pitch sources with a random melody. And then we have the CV stack that again will output signals according to what's going on the module, just like as we've seen until now. So here I have a sine wave going to the input, right? And I have here one LFO that I'm going to use to push this counter, to push this up, right? You can see when it will be full, we get a gate out of the full output. Right, but now I can use another one with a different rhythm to pop, to take this out basically. And then we get a sample and hold. Let me show you this. Right, so this will basically be the output. The signal output will be a sample and hold. It will sample this sine wave, right? And you can change the behavior. We have FIFO, which is first in, first out. If you worked once in a kitchen, you know this. Or we have LIFO, last in, first out. You can change this in the right-click menu, and this will change the behavior of the sample and hold. So if I go with something quicker, you can see really how it will track. You can see how it tracks, right? The sine wave. Basically, it will be a sine wave that is working together with this stack here, right? It's a CV stack. And when it's full, you can get a trigger. So for example, when it's full now, I can take the trigger and reset everything, right? So it will stack up, it will reach the top, and then it will reset from down. And again, it's all about creating different, rhythms, gate sources, all sorts of different pitch modulation that you will not get otherwise. I think, yes, they can be a bit overwhelming, but again, look at the manual, and if you see something like a gated comparator, or you see a binary sequencer, and you don't really understand what's going on, take this step by step. Think, okay, what binary means? What is going on here? Why do I have a clock and I have clock divisions, right? Go step by step. And again, look at the manual. I think the manual is really helpful. And just try and send those signals in all sorts of different ways to use pitch information for modulation, for triggering different events, and so on and so forth. The next question is from Cotter. Thanks for all your help in understanding VCV through the years. Thank you so much for your support. Tips on preparing a live set in rack. I know you've done videos on this before, but specifically something with the ability to hot swap voices and sequences with a MIDI controller in order to transition between songs rather than performing on a single patch while prioritizing low CPU performance. So I think we talked about this in the last Q&A. But the solution that I suggest here that you can use is the strip module from Sturmelder. It's available again in the library, and basically you can use it to bypass and unbypass whole rows of modules with the MIDI controller. You can do this also externally with the MIDI controller. So imagine you have multiple patchlets right inside this big patch, and you just turn things on and off, save CPU, and also make sure nothing is playing when it's not supposed to play. Right, so here I have an example. I have here this voice here, right, a SEC3 sequencing the VCO. Let's say that I start the performance like this. Right, and then I bring in another voice. Right, and I have this playing. Right, what I also recommend is having some sort of voice always there for filling in gaps. Right, so let's say that for now I want to move on to the next patchlet, right, to the next sequence, let's say. So I start bringing things in and out. I bring in this, I have here noise that's just like to fill in the gaps. Right, I'm finished with this voice. Right, I'm going to turn it off. It will turn off all of the row and it will save lots and lots of CPU. Right, and then I can start bringing in the second voice. Right, let's say that this is what I have now. Right, just like this. Right, and it's playing and I'm performing and everything is okay. Right, again, I want to move to a different voice, and it depends how you perform things, right? But the idea here is basically that now I can turn this off, save CPU, move on to the next part, right? And so on and so forth. So like this, with the strip module, you can build whole patchlets, and it will, again, it will bypass the whole row. So the whole patchlets, you can build whole patchlets and then just turn them on and off and save lots and lots of CPU. So instead of having one patch that you perform on, you can have many different patchlets in one file, let's say, in one patch, and then turn things on and off and bring them in and out and perform things and save lots and lots of CPU. The next one is from Crypto Techie. Hi, can you give an example of why you use Sum, so the Sum module from VCV? Couldn't you just go directly from a polyphonic output into the mixer? Why do you need to sum the signal first? So I have 3 examples to show you when and why I would use the Sum module. So basically the Sum module, for those of you who don't know, the Sum module will take a polyphonic signal and will sum it into a monophonic signal. So the question here, why using it? Why can I not just send the polyphonic signal to the mixer and that's it? So first of all, you will use the Sum module when you have modules that are not polyphonic, that are monophonic. And here is an example. Right, here I have a polyphonic signal coming from the VCO. It's playing basically a chord. You can see it has 3 channels, but I'm using the Shaper module from Squinky Labs, and it's not polyphonic, it's a monophonic module. And this what will happen, listen. We get only the first channel. We don't get the other 2 voices because again, it will only recognize the first channel because it's monophonic and not polyphonic. So I don't get chords, I don't get my voice. Right, so I'm going to use the Sum module before the Shaper. And now I get my chord, basically, right? I get my polyphonic voice because again, I summed it into a signal that Shaper can work with. So this was the first example. The second example, which is also quite important, is gain staging. The more voices you have, the louder the signal will get, and further down the chain you might get issues. So here I have 8 channels of polyphony. You know what? Let's go with 7 first. And this is going to plateau the reverb. Now, plateau is also not polyphonic, but, and this is how all monophonic modules should work, it will internally sum the signals. So if I send a polyphonic signal into plateau, it will internally sum the signals just like if I would use a Sum module, just like we've seen before, right? So even though it's monophonic, it will still be able to work with polyphonic signals. But now we have a different issue. Listen to this. I will take them out. Here we have 2 voices. Everything is okay, right? If I start adding voices, we get distortion. Listen to this, we get distortion. I'm not even using reverb here, it's all the way wet. Right, but the dry signal is distorted because the signal in the input is way too hot, is way too high. So you will use also sometimes the Sum module for gain staging, for lowering the level. You can see I just connected it to the input. Already you can see it's way too hot, right? But now I can lower the level. And we still get a polyphonic signal, we still get our chord, but no more distortion. We change the level, the input gain, the drive, whatever you want to call it, in the input of the reverb. So the reverb now is not distorting, right? So this is another reason why you want to use the Sum module. Another reason is to save CPU. you. Sometimes you use modules that are polyphonic, but you don't need them to be polyphonic. When you think about it, polyphony, basically, it means that you have control over each and every voice. If you have something like a filter and you modulate all of the voices together, you don't really need polyphony. Here I have an example with Pack 6. This is a multi-band filter. It's a filter bank. Right, I have 6 voices going into it, and have a look at the CPU performance. It's on 5.5, 5.3, right? Sometimes it goes higher, sometimes it goes lower. That's a lot of CPU. Now, I'm not going to use this module polyphonically. I'm not going to modulate anything in polyphonically. I just want to shape my sound, let's say, right? So I don't really need polyphony. So if I use the sum module, again, have a look at the CPU performance. I'm going to sum the signals into a monophonic signal. Have a look. Right? It's a quarter, I guess, more than a quarter less CPU, a fifth even. Right? So you can save also CPU if you sum the polyphonic signal into a monophonic signal. So again, 3 reasons why you would want to use the sum module. First of all, if you use modules that cannot work with polyphonic signals, you want to sum them into a monophonic signal. Second of all, gain staging, just making sure your signal is not too hot. Polyphonic signals might and will be way too loud for some modules. And another reason is to save CPU. If you use different modules further down the chain that you don't need them to be polyphonic, you can save CPU and just change the rest of the chain after the sum module into a monophonic chain. Another question from Crypto Techie. I'd also love to see some patches with the docB collection. I'm not so sure if they are new, but there are 80 modules and they look very cool and very intimidating. Thanks. So actually, the docB collection was my New Year's resolution. I really want this year to explore this whole collection. I still have a few videos I want to do from last year that I didn't have the chance to do, but it will come maybe, but you can help me and choose maybe the module I should start with. Maybe it's a sequencer, maybe it's a voice. So if you have an idea, if you have some request, which module should I start with from the docB collection, let me know and I'll see what I can do. And we have another question from Peter. Hi Peter, is there a way to create soothing generative ambient sounds in quadraphonic or surround 5+? That would be fantastic. Yes, so I think we spoke about quad a while ago, but basically you have the Audio 16 module from VCV. So you have 16 channels, that's 8 channels stereo, that you can use to route. Of course, you will need the hardware for this if you have a surround setup and if you have an audio interface with enough outputs, right? You can basically route things to the different outputs, right? You can also use something like pulsars, for example, which is a crossfader where you can crossfade between 8 different channels, right? You send, for example, noise or an ambient voice into the input, and then you start morphing between the different outputs, so everything is moving around. Again, you will need the hardware for this. Of course, you cannot do this if you don't have the speakers and the outputs and the connections. And if you want quad, and I think I showed this already once, there is the quad panel from Nischi. Again, you have 1 input, and then you have 4 outputs that you can use to crossfade, basically to send this input into the different outputs, right? And create like this a quad setup. And you can also chain them if you just do something like this. Connect the outputs to the inputs. You can also chain them and have many voices in quad, which can also be quite interesting. The next question is coming from Chris. Hi. What are some ways of creating true legato notes in a generative sequence in VCV? Like on a piano where the decay tail of a note overlaps the attack of the next note. Ideally, it would be possible to randomly play some notes legato and others staccato in the same sequence. I think this requires a polyphonic voice to allow the notes to overlap, but it seems tricky to implement. Note that I don't mean portamento, which can be done monophonically. Yes, indeed. Just like when you hold the sustain pedal on a Piano. Basically, there is a module for this. It's called assign from Bog Audio. This one here, it will take a monophonic sequence and it will assign each note to a different channel polyphonically, which means that you can have legato, you can have these sustained notes. So what I have here, I have sample and hold generating pitch information, sequencing the sine VCO, which will sound like this. Right, for now we don't have legato. Whenever the next note plays, the note before it just cuts out. But I can start adding channels, number of channels, right, and choose how many notes of polyphony I want, how many notes will overlap each other. So if I go with 5, let's say, right? We get legato, we get sustained notes, just like on a piano. Now, randomly having some notes staccato, some legato, this I'm not so sure how you can do this with the assign module, but you can do this with modulating the envelope. So for example, here I will modulate the decay of the envelope. And again, this will happen polyphonically. I'm using here a polyphonic sample and hold. So each note will get a different envelope. Some will have more decay. So some will sustain longer. Some will have less decay and will be more of staccato. I can listen to this for a while. Right? So like this you can have overlapping notes and you can change between legato and staccato quite easily with the polyphonic sample and hold. And that was it. Thank you again, Patreons, so much for your support. Thank you again, PathSet, for the donating your collections to the challenges on Discord. Again, Patreons, come join us on Discord. We have a lovely community, giveaways, challenges, and all sorts of different interesting things. If you are not a Patreon, come join us on Patreon. Again, lovely community, lots and lots of extra stuff, and it's fun. Thank you again. Cheers.